Now, the video I'm making today has essentially two layers to it. So in the first part, I'm going to be talking about genetics and genetic limitations. Now, we tend to live in a society where it's claimed at least that everyone's the same and that we all have the same capacities, and we're basically, apart from some superficial physical differences, identical. This includes both racial differences as well as differences between men and women. And this is rather obviously false. Now, I always go back to the gym and strength training and weightlifting, bodybuilding, whatever you want to call it, as a really good example of how a person can learn that people are not the same. When you go to the gym, you see all kinds of different shapes. I'm not just talking about people who are out of shape. You see factors that can have a huge effect on progression in strength training or bodybuilding. For example, if you have narrow clavicles and short muscle bellies and not a lot of fast twitch muscle fibers, you're not going to be able to do a lot. That's me, by the way. I have absolutely horrific genes for bodybuilding and strength training. I'm weak, I'm narrow, yeah. So, and then alternatively, you'll get someone who has the tiny joint insertions, long muscle bellies, wide clavicles, low lat insertions. I mean, everything you can imagine. And then this person is going to look phenomenal. If you combine that with naturally high production of testosterone, you're going to have someone who's naturally gifted. And you can see it. You can see the different shapes of people. You can see all of these different aspects. And it's so obvious when you've worked out for a while, observing yourself, your own limitations, as well as other people's limitations or their lack of limitations, that people are not the same. You've all heard the joke of the guy who just looks at a dumbbell and he grows versus the guy who's been trained for 3 years, working his ass off on his diet, and he can't get half the results. These are real examples. And even in bodybuilding, even the online community, there's persistent mythology that you can trick your genetics through hard work. You can't. It just doesn't work that way. And I always come back to that because it's so obvious and patent to anyone who spent time in the gym. The other day I was having a conversation with CS MGTOW, with Clive, and he has West African genetics, but probably are some of the best for bodybuilding, weightlifting in terms of aesthetics. Narrow waist, long muscle bellies, carries very little body fat. Whereas for me, I have to torture myself for 6 months to get a six pack if I really, really want to get totally ripped with consistent diet, and I still won't look half as good. So it's pretty obvious that in that realm there are differences. And then you can look at just more general sports-related things. We all know the kid who absolutely sucked, and I have not an athletic bone in my body, no athletic genes whatsoever. I sucked at all sports. I wasn't good at any sport, and I'm not good at any sport. And I still participated, and I sucked. And then there were guys who were just brilliant at it. They were fast. They had good reflexes. Whether it was football, baseball, American football, basketball, etc. This should all be pretty obvious that there are huge differences. But then, even if we're willing to acknowledge that, we rarely move on from physical differences to mental differences. And for a while on this channel and elsewhere, we've been trying to combat this idea that men and women are identical, that we just kind of have some superficial differences in sexual organs and maybe some differences in strength and height and whatever. And increasingly, and I will be making a video probably next month, or in detail on female-male brain differences. Increasingly, there's just evidence surfacing that's not the case. And we need to actually be able to talk about this if we actually want to have a constructive conversation about what's best for men and women. You see, the problem with claiming that everyone's the same is it does a disservice to everyone. This has been talked about by Nico as well as CS, in the sense that, for example, the claim that everyone's racially identical when different medications have different effects on different people with different racial profiles, that's dangerous, actually. So the doctrine of sameness is actually causing harm to people, quite literally in some cases, and it's preventing us from having an honest conversation, not a conversation that's supposed to, lead to prejudice, although some people would exploit it along those lines, or a conversation that would lead to segregating people, although some people certainly would use that argument. I wouldn't use it that along those lines. But a conversation that allows us to focus in our strengths and weaknesses, and where necessary, improve those weaknesses and further fortify those strengths. Now, there's a reason why I'm talking about this, right? Barbara Ross in the past, and I to a more limited extent, have talked about sort of the truncated nature of the way we educate and raise women. And he's pointed out as well that MGTOW probably are the only men that at least somewhat believe that women are capable of developing their minds. Now, if you'd watched my MGTOW Talks with C.S. MGTOW, you saw that he mentioned that his ex-wife is constantly giving his daughter nail polish to paint her nails, and he's telling her, don't do this. Give her books. Try to have her learn about. She has plenty of time to polish her nails later. And yet his ex-wife staunchly refuses and keeps on giving her basically the Barbie doll kit. Now, this is exactly what I'm talking about. That going back to my first example, and I'm going to return to the example of his daughter, of say bodybuilding, weightlifting, and having bad genetics. Like I said, I don't have an athletic bone in my body. Weak, narrow. I have the worst. I put on fat easily. Worst genetics possible. However, that never prevented me from doing it anyway. And why? Because even with the shittiest genetics possible, I'm pretty close, I still benefit from strength and resistance training. I still have a better body than I otherwise would. I still have, I'm still preventing muscular atrophy that naturally sets on with age. I'm still stronger than I otherwise would be. I still have better bone and joint connections because of it. I mean, there are a lot of benefits to strength training, and the benefit, just because you're not going to excel at something, this is my point, just because even if you're at the bottom rung of the ladder, and I certainly am, it doesn't mean it's not worth doing, at least to some extent. Now, obviously, in life, you need to think about what you're skilled at and adept at and probably pursue that. I mean, for example, it was never in the cards that I was going to be a professional athlete of any sort because I don't have an athletic bone in my body, period. Now, that was pretty obvious. But when I take my daily walk in the park, I see tons of people jogging, and they don't look like athletes. Why are they doing it? Because it's still fucking beneficial. The point I'm trying to make here is that we need to be aware of our genetic limitations, but even having certain limitations, and we all have different limitations, and we all have different gifts and different disadvantages, we need to be also constantly aware that we can benefit from doing things that we don't have a natural aptitude for. Like I benefit from lifting weights or occasionally doing cardio, which I hate doing, but these are all beneficial. Tons of people who are not naturally gifted in athletics and sporting activities do them anyway because they benefit. It helps them maintain a healthy body weight. It helps them maintain their muscular endurance, their cardiovascular endurance, whatever. These are all benefits that can be reaped from these activities, irrespective of whether or not you're gifted. Because in my own personal example, for reiteration's sake, the Stardust who lifts weights, who engages in strength training is a better version than the Stardust that doesn't. I know. I've been through phases in my life where I've let myself go for months and turned into a disgusting blob. It's just better. It doesn't matter whether I'm gifted or not. It also means whether I'm not young anymore, but even if I were young, of course I'll never enter a bodybuilding competition or a strongman competition. Who cares? It's still beneficial. So people do all kinds of things that they're not naturally gifted at because it's beneficial. There are net benefits to it. Now, what I'm getting at, and I wanted to point out the physical stuff first, is a very important point. I think it's something that at least maybe subconsciously CS was trying to get at when he was talking about his daughter. In our society, we tend to give women a free pass for just about everything. Women naturally, biologically, are more emotional, if you want to use that term. They're more emotionally unstable. I think that's the better way of describing it. I wouldn't say they're necessarily more emotional. They're more emotionally unstable. They're more irrational. They're more superstitious. They have all of these things, right? Now, many people's argument is that that's perfectly fine because that's just the way women are, and they shouldn't make any effort. Now, by the same token, someone could argue, well, being a obese slob who has no genetic aptitude for athletics, that's perfectly fine too, right? No, it's not. That's the thing, it's not. People should still try to reap the benefits of positive activities, whether they're physical or mental. And just as I've kind of trained myself over the years to try to be more or less the best version I could be of myself, which is not that impressive, admittedly, but still, compared to others, I don't see the problem, or really the issue, with putting pressure on women to try to use reason, rationality, and to emote less unnecessarily. There's a time and place for it, right? Emotional outbursts. I mean, women are more emotional. This is not the correct phrase. It's women are more irrational, leading to emotional connections to things and events that really, really aren't helping anyone, particularly women. And so, just because a woman might not have the best spatial awareness, say, compared to a man, just because a woman has to fight against natural inclinations towards being emotive, that's what women are, tend to be emotive, and irrational and superstitious and believing in all sorts of silly things, doesn't mean they shouldn't fight against that, and doesn't mean they shouldn't try to optimize themselves. And too often, we, that is men, give women a free pass on this. In fact, the very definition of being feminine, which a lot of men seem to treasure, is essentially being a mental invalid, right? Meek, submissive, and incapable of rational thought. This is the definition of what's feminine, apart from the physical attributes. And the funny thing about this is that most men don't have a problem with this. And when men do have a problem with this, it's only in the sense that sort of the opposition of feminism. That is, feminists tend not to be meek and submissive. They're still highly irrational, they emote a lot, and they're emotionally all over the place. That's fine, right? To a degree. It's the fact that they're not meek and submissive. Right? And most men would have no problem with women continuing to be this way, in this state of perpetual truncation. So it's not an argument, to my mind, that women should not be essentially forced to engage in rigorous mental exercise and to challenge themselves mentally in a way that's similar to men, just because they might have natural disadvantages in certain areas. Any more than it's an argument that I shouldn't hit the gym and do what I can within my limitations, because I'm still benefiting from doing that. I might not look as good as other people. I might not be as strong as other people. My muscle bellies might be super short. So what? I'm still benefiting from it, right? And in the process, I've gained a huge amount of knowledge about nutrition and exercise techniques and all these other things, because I do have decent genes for mental activities. So I'm able to comprehend this stuff. So this continual truncation that women find themselves in, and something that CS is trying to fight against with his own daughter, but unfortunately, his ex-wife has custody and primary custody, and so there's not much he can do. This is something we too often give a free pass to women to, and so what we end up having are these absurd situations, and many of you might have seen this, I think, a couple of weeks ago, where I think it was Milo Yiannopoulos debating some woman in science and she was claiming that women should be allowed to emote and cry and do all these things and still be taken seriously. No, they need to train themselves to realize that there's a time and place for this, and they need to try to train away, to the best of their abilities, their own subjective, emotive feelings about things, because these are actually detrimental to the conduct of proper science, frankly speaking, and for that matter, any proper rational conversation. See, it's not enough that women, in the traditionalist mindset, just go back to being, meek, submissive, and emotionally unstable, and that's, along with their physical attributes, that's feminine, and that's what men so cherish about them. No, they really need to be pushed a little bit more to their limits. because there are still benefits. Just because you don't have a perfect aptitude in something doesn't mean you shouldn't pursue it. And that's true of mental activities as well. There are plenty of things I suck at, and I still try to learn at least the basics of, because I want to understand the world I'm living in. And increasingly, we're living in a complex society, in a complex mechanized world with so many technological phenomena and so many new scientific discoveries. And you look at these people, in particular women, not exclusively, I see men doing this too, but mostly women, who are just, bleeding away on their smartphones and pressing buttons, and they don't have a fucking clue of the innovation that went into it, and they don't even want to know. Remember that conversation that Sargon Akkad had with Geraint What, where he described his wife simply asking him, does it work? That's enough. Does it work? It sounds like my mother, too. Does it work? That's all I need to know. So throughout history, we've let women just sit by, cruise by, and not participate with no challenge to this state of mind. And so to the mind, for example, of C.S. McTow's ex-wife, it's perfectly fine that their daughter just grow up being a truncated, mentally truncated Barbie doll. And I think it's very sad, because we all know that you listen to C.S., he's a very educated, intelligent man who would have a lot of input, I think. And I think, if the world were just and fair, then he probably should have primary custody. But, that's the way the cookie crumbles, just as an example. But this is a bad argument. The argument that just because people have natural inclinations, that they shouldn't struggle and strive and try to prove themselves in areas that they're not necessarily skilled in. Now, of course, when you're pursuing a career or your livelihood, if you suck at maths, for example, if you're terrible at mathematics, becoming an economist specialized in econometrics is not going to be for you. It's not going to happen. If you have no athletic bones in your body, becoming a world-class track and field athlete or a sprinter or bodybuilder or weightlifter, that's not going to happen, right? There's certain things you need to be aware of. However, if you want to understand certain aspects of economics, you could still suck at maths, but take the time and energy and struggle to understand some of the basic principles of econometrics. Or you can learn sprinting, or you can jog, or you can hit the weights, or whatever. But with women, we just say, they're emotional, they're like that, we'll just leave them be and let them just continue being so. With men, we have to challenge ourselves, even in things that we're not gifted at, right? I never was good at mathematics, for example, but I had to push myself, and I became decent by a lot of fucking hard work and application. I never had any talent for it, right? But instead, we listen to women in maths or girls in maths and what have you, and they're supposed to be given a special environment where they can thrive in, and blah 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 blah. And constantly giving a free pass to women, and it's not enough just to call feminists and women out on their absurdities, in the sense of not being meek and submissive and whatever. I mean, they need to be called out on their mental truncation. And frankly speaking, most women find themselves in the same state. They're not interested in exploring the world. And I get that they don't have a natural inclination any more than I or other people don't have a natural inclination to be professional bodybuilders. But who cares? It's still beneficial to learn this stuff. If women want to participate in humanity and be anything other than essentially sex objects and baby factories, which most of them still remain this day, they're going to have to at least partly discover some exploratory bone in their body. They're going to have to challenge their overly emotional states, their irrational fits with rationality. They're going to have to try to look at the bigger picture. Yeah, it's hard. It's not easy. But a lot of things aren't. And especially if you don't have that natural aptitude for things, people naturally just tend to drift in those things and never do anything. Women are naturally adept at being emotive and not connecting the dots in a rational manner. This should not be encouraged as feminine and positive. This should be discouraged as neither masculine nor feminine, but as a really bad behavioral trait and a bad mental state to be in. Men might be the primary exemplars of rationality and reason, but men should not, almost by fiat, hold sovereignty over rationality and reason. Women really need to be challenged on this, frankly speaking, and feminists, well, regardless, they're probably the primary candidates for that. So, in review, just because you're not good at something doesn't mean you shouldn't try and try to prove yourself at it, because there's so many benefits in doing all kinds of mental and physical activities where you're never going to be top dog or even top 100th dog, but you're still going to benefit in the long run. And women need to be forced, at least some way, to see these benefits and to shrug off some of these really, really poorly evolved attributes that they've developed over the millions of years of hominid evolution in a modern society. Remember, maladaptive behavior, being overly emotive, being highly irrational, this is what led us to the mess we have with feminism and the disrepute it's now garnering, as well as the sad state of affairs between men and women, and the really, really shitty state of affairs for men. Too much unreason. This is not good. We shouldn't be encouraging this in women. Women should not be encouraged to be mental invalids, but they are, because it's just good enough, because they have fucking a cunt and tits. Not good enough. Anyway, I'm going to end this video. Thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.